The quantum communication networks erupted into chaos within minutes of Zixtan's emergency broadcast. Messages flew across the galaxy faster than light itself, carrying the terrifying news of the massive unknown vessel to every corner of civilized space. On the military command world of Nexus Prime, Admiral Techmore was enjoying his morning meal when his personal communicator began shrieking with maximum priority alerts. The old warrior had served in 3 major conflicts and countless minor skirmishes, but he'd never heard the emergency tone reserved for galaxy-threatening events. His breakfast forgotten, Techmore rushed to the command center where dozens of his staff officers were already working frantically at their stations. The main display showed tactical readouts that made his blood run cold. The unknown vessel wasn't just large, it was impossibly massive, dwarfing even the legendary fortress ships of the ancient wars. "Sir, we're receiving similar reports from monitoring stations across 7 sectors," his aide reported, voice trembling. "The object maintains a steady course toward the core worlds, estimated arrival at major population centers in 72 hours. Techmore studied the projected specifications with growing horror. The vessel's estimated mass suggested armor plating thick enough to withstand planetary bombardment. Its power signatures indicated energy generation capabilities that could fuel entire star systems. Most terrifying of all, the preliminary weapon scans suggested firepower that could crack planets in half. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out in government buildings and military installations. The Hegemony Council called emergency sessions. The Trade Federation suspended all commercial traffic in affected sectors. Even the normally aggressive Vorthan Empire pulled their fleets back to defensive positions around their homeworlds. Civilian populations reacted with predictable panic. On worlds closest to the vessel's projected path, families packed their belongings and fled to outer system colonies. Spaceports became chaotic scenes of desperate people trying to book passage on any ship heading away from the core worlds. The most disturbing aspect wasn't the ship's size or apparent firepower, it was the complete silence. Every attempt at communication met with absolutely nothing. No response to diplomatic channels, no acknowledgement of military frequencies, not even basic navigation protocols that prevented collisions in crowded space lanes. Admiral Techmore coordinated, with fleet commanders from 7 different species, pooling their forces for the first time in galactic history. Kethvarian battlecruisers, Zephyrian destroyers, and Valdorian assault ships all converged on intercept courses. Never before had such a diverse armada assembled for a single threat. But even as hundreds of warships moved into position, a chilling realization settled over the military leadership. Their combined fleets, representing the pinnacle of galactic military technology, looked pathetically small compared to the massive intruder. The unknown vessel continued its relentless approach, moving through their space like it owned it. No communication, no negotiation, no explanation. Just the steady, terrifying advance of something that treated the entire galactic civilization as irrelevant. As evacuation ships fled the core worlds and military forces prepared for the worst possible scenario, one question haunted every thinking being in the galaxy. What did this massive silent vessel want, and why had it chosen now to reveal itself? The emergency alert spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Within hours, every major government, military base and civilian authority knew about the massive ship heading toward the heart of galactic civilization. The quantum networks buzzed with frantic messages as panic began to set in across dozens of star systems. Admiral Techmore had seen plenty of threats during his long military career, but nothing like this. Standing in the war room on Nexus Prime, he watched the tactical displays with growing dread. The numbers didn't make sense. This wasn't just a big ship, it was a floating fortress that made their most powerful battleships look like children's toys. "How accurate are these readings?" he asked his chief analyst, hoping for some mistake in the calculations. "Triple-checked. Sir, the vessel's mass is equivalent to a small asteroid. Its energy output could power half the core worlds, and these weapon signatures..." The analyst paused, clearly struggling with what he was seeing. "Sir, the projected firepower could glass entire continents. Around the galaxy, Other military leaders were having similar conversations. Fleet commanders from 7 different species, beings who had been enemies for centuries, were now working together for the first time in galactic history. The hegemony's sleek warships, the Trade Federation's heavily armed escorts, and even the mysterious vessels of the Outer Rim Collective all began moving toward intercept positions. But cooperation wasn't their biggest problem. The real terror came from the complete silence of the approaching vessel. Every ship in known space followed basic communication protocols. Pirates announced their demands, military forces identified themselves, even automated cargo haulers broadcast their shipping manifests. This massive ship said absolutely nothing. Communication officers across the galaxy tried everything. They broadcast on every known frequency, used universal mathematical sequences, even transmitted basic pictographs that any intelligent species should recognize. The response was always the same: nothing. The ship moved through space like a ghost, acknowledging no one and explaining nothing. On civilian worlds along the vessel's projected path, the evacuations began quietly at first. Wealthy families booked passage on luxury liners heading to the outer colonies. But as news spread, the evacuations turned into desperate stampedes. Spaceports became chaotic scenes of terrified families trying to escape before the unknown ship arrived. The Kelvani government tried to maintain order by announcing that the vessel might be peaceful, but their own military forces were already pulling back to defensive positions around their homeworld. The Zephyrian Empire, normally aggressive toward any unknown contact, recalled all their patrol fleets and activated their planetary shields for the first time in 2 centuries. What made everything worse was how the ship moved. It didn't follow normal space lanes or respect territorial boundaries. It simply traveled in a perfectly straight line toward the most densely populated region of the galaxy, as if the borders and laws of dozens of civilizations meant nothing at all. Admiral Thecamore coordinated the largest fleet assembly in galactic history, over 300 warships from multiple species, all converging on a single point in space. But even as he watched the tactical display showing their combined forces, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were woefully unprepared for whatever was coming their way. Fleet Commander Velasha had never felt so small in her entire military career. Standing on the bridge of her flagship, she watched the tactical display showing 60 of the galaxy's most advanced warships arranged in perfect formation at the Helios Junction. This narrow passage between 2 massive gas giants was the only practical route to the core systems, the perfect place for a blockade. Her fleet represented the combined military might of multiple civilizations. Hegemony battle cruisers with their gleaming hulls, Trade Federation destroyers bristling with weapons, and the angular assault ships of the Outer Rim Collective. Never before had such a diverse armada worked together under a single command. But even with all that firepower at her disposal, Velasha felt a growing sense of dread as long-range sensors detected the approaching vessel. The massive ship maintained its steady course, showing no signs of slowing down or changing direction. It was heading straight for their blockade, as if they weren't even there. "Sir, we're receiving no response to our communication attempts," her communications officer reported. "The vessel continues to ignore all hails on every frequency." Velasha studied the approaching ship on her main screen. Up close, it looked even more intimidating than the sensor readings suggested. The dark hull seemed to absorb starlight, making it appear like a moving shadow against the cosmic backdrop. Its design was unlike anything in their databases. Angular, brutal, and utterly alien. "Range to target?" she asked. 50,000 kilometers and closing, sir. At current speed, it will reach our position in 12 minutes. The fleet captains on the communication channels were getting nervous. Some suggested opening fire immediately, while others recommended pulling back to a safer distance. But Velasha had her orders from the Galactic Defense Council. Attempt peaceful contact, but don't let the vessel pass. All ships prepare warning. "Shots," she commanded. "We'll fire across their bow when they reach the 20,000-kilometer mark. Maybe that will get their attention." As the massive vessel approached, Velasha could see more details of its construction. The hull appeared to be made of some unknown material that didn't match any known alloys. Strange geometric patterns were etched into its surface, and what looked like weapon ports were sealed behind armored covers. 20,000 kilometers, sir. All ships, fire warning shots across the target's bow. Make it clear we're serious, but don't actually hit them. The coordinated volley lit up space with brilliant energy beams and projectile weapons. The shots passed harmlessly in front of the approaching vessel, creating a dazzling light show that should have been impossible to ignore. For a moment, nothing happened. The ship continued its steady approach, as if the warning shots had never been fired. Then, without any visible movement or preparation, sections of the vessel's hull simply slid open. What emerged made Velasha's blood freeze. Weapon turrets unlike anything she'd ever seen extended from hidden compartments with mechanical precision. They moved with fluid grace, tracking targets with terrifying accuracy. The response was swift and surgical. 3 brilliant beams of energy lanced out from the mysterious ship, each one striking a different frigate in her formation. The targeted vessels simply vanished, not exploded, not damaged, but completely vaporized in microseconds. One moment, they were there. The next moment, empty space remained where 300 crew members had been. Then, as quickly as they had appeared, the weapon turrets retracted back into the hull. The demonstration was over, and the message was crystal clear. The massive vessel could have destroyed the entire fleet, but chose to show restraint. "All ships, fall back to escort positions," Velasha ordered, her voice barely steady. "Maintain safe distance and shadow the target." As her fleet retreated, the mysterious vessel continued its inexorable journey toward the core worlds, having just demonstrated that their combined military might was utterly inadequate to stop it. Dr. Nixell had spent her entire career studying ancient civilizations, but she'd never worked under this kind of pressure. The emergency call from the Galactic Council had pulled her away from a peaceful research dig and thrown her into the most important investigation of her life. Somewhere in the vast archives of Terminus Prime lay the answer to the galaxy's most pressing question. What was that massive ship, and where did it come from? The Grand Archive stretched for kilometers beneath the planet's surface, containing millions of years of galactic history. Ancient data crystals, quantum storage matrices, and even primitive digital files from long-dead civilizations filled endless corridors. Normally, Dr. Nixell would have months or years to conduct a proper search. Today, she had hours. Her research team worked frantically through the night, their scanning equipment humming as it processed terabytes of historical data. They searched for any reference to the mysterious ship's unique design elements, the angular hull, the energy absorption properties, the weapon configurations that had vaporized 3 warships in seconds. "Doctor, I'm finding scattered references to similar technological signatures," called out her assistant, Cathan, "but they're all in the classified pre-contact files, Level 7 security clearance required." Dr. Nixell's blood ran cold. Level 7 files contained information so sensitive that most government officials never saw them. These were records of species deemed too dangerous for contact, civilizations that had been quietly monitored and avoided. She input her emergency research codes, hoping they would be enough. The files unlocked with a soft chime, and what she found made her stumble backward from the display screen. There, buried in a survey report from over 3,000 years ago, was a detailed analysis of a species called humans from the outer rim of the galaxy. The ancient survey team had catalogued humans as a primitive species that had barely achieved faster-than-light travel. Their homeworld, listed as Terra or Earth, was noted as being located in an isolated spiral arm far from galactic civilization. The recommendation was clear: avoid contact until the species matured technologically and socially. But it was the behavioral analysis that made Dr. Nixell's hands shake as she read. The survey described humans as unusually aggressive compared to most galactic species, highly territorial, and possessing an almost frightening ability to adapt and improve their technology at unprecedented rates. The report's conclusion was ominous. Humans showed potential for rapid advancement that could make them either valuable allies or dangerous enemies. "Doctor, look at this," Cathan called urgently. "I found technical specifications from their early spacecraft. The basic design elements matched the mystery vessel, but scaled up by orders of magnitude. Dr. Nixell compared the ancient human ship designs with the current threat. The similarities were undeniable. The angular construction, the emphasis on function over form, the aggressive weapon placement. It was like looking at a primitive ancestor of the massive vessel now approaching the core worlds. The implications hit her like a physical blow. If this was indeed humanity, they'd had 3 millennia of isolation to develop their technology. 3,000 years of advancement, while the rest of the galaxy ignored them, dismissed them as primitive and irrelevant. Her hands trembling, Dr. Nixell activated the emergency communication link to the Galactic Council. The news she had to deliver would terrify every leader in civilized space. The mysterious vessel wasn't from some unknown alien empire or ancient lost civilization. It was from a species they had deliberately ignored, left alone to grow and evolve in the darkness between the stars. And now, after 30 centuries of technological development, humanity had finally decided to make contact on their own terms. The silence that had gripped the galaxy for days finally broke as the massive vessel entered the Omega system. Every communication array, emergency frequency, and private channel across civilized space suddenly crackled to life with the same transmission. The voice that emerged was unlike anything the galaxy had heard before. It was clearly artificial, enhanced by technology that made it resonate with an almost hypnotic quality. Yet beneath the electronic modulation, there was something unmistakably organic, the tone and inflection of a living being who had chosen every word carefully. On the Galactic Parliament Station, emergency session leaders froze as the voice filled their chambers. Traffic controllers at busy spaceports stopped mid-sentence as their equipment broadcast the message. Even civilian families huddled in their homes heard the transmission through their personal devices. "I am Commander Rachel Morrison of the Terran. Colonial Forces vessel Sovereign's Edge," the voice began, each word pronounced with perfect clarity and flawless galactic standard. "Your predecessors catalogued my species as insufficient for contact in your calendar year 847 GSC. The words sent chills through every listener. Dr. Nixell, still working frantically in the archives, felt her worst fears confirmed. This was indeed humanity, but not the primitive species from the ancient files. This was something that had evolved far beyond anything the galaxy had imagined. "We have spent the intervening centuries improving ourselves," the voice continued, and there was something almost amused in that artificial tone. "During this time, we observed your civilizations from a distance. We watched your wars, your peace treaties, your technological advances, and your social developments. In the Parliament chambers, representatives from dozens of species sat in stunned silence. The human was speaking as if they had been watching the galaxy like specimens in a laboratory, studying them while remaining. Completely undetected, we sent diplomatic missions to your outer colonies 17 times over the past millennium," the voice revealed, causing gasps throughout the chamber. Each mission was turned away without consideration. We offered trade partnerships, scientific collaboration, and cultural exchange. Your responses were always the same. Humans were not ready for galactic society. The transmission paused, and in that silence, the weight of centuries of ignored opportunities settled over the listeners. How many advances could have been achieved through cooperation? How many conflicts might have been prevented with human assistance? We tried patience, we tried diplomacy, we tried following your protocols and respecting your borders, Commander, Morrison continued, her enhanced voice carrying a hint of steel beneath the calm exterior. But patience has its limits, and we have reached ours. The massive ship's presence above the Parliament station suddenly felt even more ominous. This wasn't just a demonstration of technological superiority, it was the culmination of centuries of frustration and deliberate exclusion. "The galaxy will now acknowledge humanity's presence," the commander stated with finality. "We are transmitting coordinates for a meeting location near your Parliament station. You have 72 hours to send your most senior diplomatic representatives. The transmission included detailed specifications for the meeting, atmospheric requirements, security protocols, and technological parameters that suggested human knowledge of galactic politics was far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. "This is not a request," Commander Morrison concluded. "This is the moment when humanity takes its rightful place in galactic civilization. Whether that transition occurs peacefully or not depends entirely on your response." The transmission ended as abruptly as it had begun, leaving the galaxy in stunned silence once again. But this time, the silence carried a very different meaning. The mysterious vessel was no longer an unknown threat. It was humanity, armed with 30 centuries of technological advancement and a very clear agenda for the future of galactic society. The demonstrations began without warning, 24 hours before the scheduled diplomatic meeting. Scientists across the galaxy watched in stunned disbelief as the human battleship began displaying technologies that shouldn't have been possible according to every known law of physics. Dr. Kithvar, the galaxy's leading expert on spatial mechanics, was monitoring the situation from his laboratory when the impossible happened. The massive human vessel, solid and imposing just moments before, began to fade, not disappearing entirely, but becoming translucent like a ghost ship floating in space. "That's not possible," he whispered, checking his instruments frantically. "Matter can't exist in a partial state like that." Yet there it was, the Sovereign's edge occupying some strange middle ground between existing and not existing. The ship was clearly still functional, still broadcasting energy signatures, still maintaining its position. But it looked like a hologram made of solid metal and energy. Other ships in the area tried scanning the partially phased vessel, but their sensors returned contradictory readings. Some instruments detected a fully solid object, others registered empty space, and a few showed readings that made no sense at all. Negative mass, inverted energy states, and spatial coordinates that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the phasing effect ended. The battleship snapped back to full solidity, looking exactly as it had before. But the message was clear. Humanity had mastered technology that allowed them to exist outside normal reality when they chose to. The second demonstration was even more unsettling. The human ship began affecting the space around it in ways that violated every understanding of gravity and orbital mechanics. Nearby asteroids, some weighing millions of tons, began moving toward the vessel as if pulled by invisible strings. But these weren't random gravitational effects. The asteroids arranged themselves in perfect geometric patterns around the battleship, forming complex mathematical shapes that rotated and shifted with mechanical precision. Triangles became hexagons, which transformed into impossible three-dimensional forms that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. "They're treating gravity like a tool," breathed Dr. Yix then, the Galactic Institute's chief physicist. "Like something they can sculpt and shape at will." The asteroid ballet continued for nearly an hour, with chunks of rock and metal dancing around the human ship in patterns that would have taken conventional technology centuries to calculate, let alone execute. When the demonstration ended, the asteroids were gently placed back in their original orbits, completely undamaged. But the third display was what truly shattered galactic understanding of what was possible. Without any visible preparation or energy buildup, a second Sovereign's Edge simply appeared next to the first one. The duplicate was perfect in every detail. Identical hull markings, the same energy signatures, even the same minor battle damage from their earlier encounter with the galactic fleet. Scientists desperately tried to determine which was the original and which was the copy, but every test gave the same result. Both ships were equally real. The two identical vessels moved in perfect synchronization, performing complex maneuvers that demonstrated they shared the same mind or control system. When one ship adjusted its position, the other mirrored the movement instantly, as if they were two parts of the same organism. Fleet commanders watching the display felt their tactical understanding crumble. How do you fight an enemy that can duplicate itself? How do you plan strategies against technology that ignores the basic rules of reality? After an hour of synchronized flight, the two battleships slowly moved toward each other. As they touched, they began to merge like two drops of liquid metal, flowing together until only one vessel remained. exactly as before, with no sign that it had ever been divided. The demonstrations ended with the human ship returning to its original position, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. But across the galaxy, scientists, military leaders, and government officials were left grappling with a terrifying new reality. Humanity possessed technology so advanced that it might as well have been magic. The Parliament chamber fell silent, as reality itself seemed to bend in the center of the Great Hall. A column of shimmering light appeared from nowhere, and within seconds, a figure began to materialize from pure energy. The process was unlike any transportation technology the galaxy had ever seen, not the crude matter-energy conversion of existing teleporters, but something far more sophisticated. Commander Rachel Morrison stepped forward as the light faded, her presence immediately commanding the attention of every representative in the chamber. Her environmental suit was a marvel of engineering that adapted in real time to the station's atmosphere, its surface shifting and adjusting as different atmospheric sensors detected the various breathing requirements of the assembled species. She was tall by human standards, with short-cropped dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. But what struck the assembled delegates most was her calm confidence. She stood in a chamber filled with hundreds of representatives from dozens of species, yet showed no sign of intimidation or uncertainty. "Honored representatives," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems, "I come before you today, not as a supplicant seeking membership in your galactic community, but as the voice of a species you have systematically ignored for over 3,000 years." With a gesture, Commander Morrison activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. The images that appeared made several delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. These were recordings from humanity's early attempts. At contact, primitive by current standards but clearly peaceful in intent. "This is the UES Friendship, our first diplomatic vessel to reach your outer colonies in the year 1247 GSC, she explained, as the hologram showed a small, ungainly ship approaching a Trade Federation outpost. The crew spent 2 years traveling through space to make peaceful contact. They were turned away without even being allowed to land. The recording showed the human ship being escorted away by armed vessels, its crew's attempts at communication completely ignored. But this was just the beginning. The merchant vessel Prosperity attempted to establish trade relations with the hegemony in 1456 GSC, Morrison continued, her voice remaining steady despite the growing tension in the chamber. "Your border patrol destroyed it without warning, claiming it was an unidentified threat." The holographic display showed the destruction of the human ship in brutal detail. 37 human lives snuffed out because they had tried to offer exotic goods and new technologies to species that refused to even acknowledge their existence. More examples followed, each one more damning than the last. Scientific expeditions fired upon by xenophobic defense forces. Cultural exchange missions denied permission to enter civilized space. Even humanitarian efforts to provide aid during natural disasters were rejected with hostility. Over 15 centuries we sent 847 peaceful missions to various parts of your galactic community, Morrison stated, the number hanging in the air like an accusation. Not one was given proper consideration. Not one was treated with the basic courtesy afforded to any recognized species. A few delegates tried to interrupt, claiming they had no knowledge of these historical events, but Morrison's enhanced voice cut through their protests. The pattern was always the same. Humans were too primitive, too aggressive, too different to be worthy of contact. We were catalogued, filed away, and forgotten like some interesting but irrelevant specimen. The holographic records showed the gradual change in human technology over the centuries. Early ships gave way to more advanced designs, but the reception remained the same: rejection, hostility, and systematic exclusion. "You taught us that the galaxy responds only to strength," Morrison concluded, her words carrying the weight of centuries of accumulated frustration. "You showed us that peaceful overtures mean nothing, that diplomatic courtesy is reserved only for those you already respect." She gestured toward the massive battleship visible through the chamber's viewing ports. Consider this lesson learned. The emergency session of the Galactic Parliament had never felt so tense. Above the station, the massive human battleship maintained its ominous position, a constant reminder that this wasn't a normal diplomatic negotiation. This was humanity dictating terms to a galaxy that had ignored them for millennia. Commander Morrison stood at the center of the Great Chamber, surrounded by hundreds of representatives from dozens of species. But she showed no signs of being overwhelmed by the situation. If anything, she seemed to be enjoying their discomfort. "Let me be absolutely clear about why we're here," she began, her voice carrying easily through the chamber's translation systems. "This is not a request for membership in your galactic community. This is humanity, informing you of how things are going to work from now on." She activated a holographic display that showed the current political map of the galaxy. Territories were marked in different colors representing various governments, trade federations, and military alliances. But scattered throughout the map were new markings, areas highlighted in a distinctive blue that hadn't been there before. "First demand," Morrison announced, "immediate recognition of the Terran Colonial Federation as a major galactic power. We claim territorial sovereignty over 247 star systems in the Outer Rim sectors, all of which have been colonized by human settlements over the past 8 centuries. The number sent murmurs of shock through the assembled delegates. 247 systems represented a territory larger than most established empires. The humans had been busy during their centuries of isolation. "Second demand," she continued, "establishment of what we call the Newcomer Protection Protocols. Never again will any developing species be dismissed or ignored as we were. Every civilization that achieves faster-than-light travel will receive immediate diplomatic contact and the opportunity for peaceful integration into galactic society." Representative Kethmore of the Hegemony Council stood up, his 4 arms gesturing in agitation. "You cannot simply dictate terms to the entire galaxy. There are proper procedures, established protocols." Morrison's laugh cut him off, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. "Procedures, protocols. We followed your procedures for 15 centuries. How did that work out for us?" She gestured, and the holographics display changed to show real-time tactical information that made every military representative in the chamber go pale. 17 red dots appeared scattered across the galaxy, each one marking the position of another human battleship identical to the one above their heads. "While you've been debating and discussing, 17 more vessels like the Sovereign's Edge have taken positions throughout galactic space," Morrison revealed. "Each one is currently protecting a developing civilization that your governments have chosen to ignore." The tactical display zoomed in on each location, showing human ships stationed near primitive worlds that were just beginning to explore space, species that the galactic community had catalogued and forgotten, just as they had done with humanity centuries ago. The Velkari in the Epsilon sector, who achieved warp drive 3 months ago and have been trying to contact your outer colonies. The Zinthek Collective, whose mathematical proofs could revolutionize your understanding of quantum mechanics. The Mordai Federation, whose medical knowledge could cure diseases that have plagued your people for generations. Each name was accompanied by detailed information about these species and their potential contributions to galactic civilization. It was clear that humanity had been doing far more than just building battleships during their isolation. They'd been cataloging and protecting the very civilizations that the established powers had ignored. "Third demand," Morrison continued, her voice taking on an even harder edge. "Restructuring of the Galactic Council to include representation for all spacefaring species, not just the established powers who happened to make contact first." The implications were staggering. The political structure that had governed the galaxy for millennia would have to be completely rebuilt. Dozens of new species would gain voting rights, fundamentally changing the balance of power. "These terms are non-negotiable," Morrison concluded. "You have 72 hours to ratify these changes and begin implementation. The age of human patience has ended." 1 year had passed since the day humanity announced itself to the galaxy, and the changes were impossible to ignore. The Galactic Parliament chamber looked completely different now, filled with representatives from species that most delegates had never even heard of before. Where once only 37 established civilizations held seats, now over 90 different species participated in galactic governance, Commander Morrison stood at the podium, but her role had changed dramatically. No longer the intimidating military officer who had delivered ultimatums, she now served as humanity's first galactic ambassador. Her uniform had been replaced by diplomatic robes that incorporated designs from dozens of different cultures, a visual symbol of the new inclusive approach to galactic civilization. 12 months ago, many of you saw humanity as a threat, she began, her voice carrying the same authority, but with a warmer tone than before. You expected us to conquer, to dominate, to impose our will through superior technology. Instead, we chose a different path. The holographic displays around the chamber showed the current state of the galaxy. Human battleships were positioned throughout civilized space, but they weren't occupying conquered territories or enforcing human rule. Instead, they served as guardians for developing civilizations, protecting species that were making their first tentative steps into the larger galactic community. The Velkari delegation arrived here 3 months ago, Morrison continued, gesturing toward a group of crystalline beings who seemed to glow with their own inner light. Their mathematical insights have already revolutionized our understanding of faster-than-light communication. The Zinthek Collective's medical advances have eliminated the Corvan plague that killed millions in the outer sectors. Each example she gave highlighted how the new approach was benefiting everyone. Species that had been ignored for centuries were now contributing knowledge and perspectives that advanced the entire galaxy. The old system hadn't just been unfair, it had been wasteful, throwing away countless opportunities for mutual advancement. Dr. Yethmar of the Hegemony Science Council stood up, his expression showing a mix of admiration and embarrassment. Ambassador. Morrison, I must ask, why didn't humanity simply take control when you clearly had the power to do so? Your technology surpasses ours by centuries. Morrison smiled, and for the first time since her arrival, it was genuinely warm. Because conquest would have made us exactly what you initially feared, another aggressive species imposing its will on others. We chose to prove that strength can be used to elevate rather than dominate. Throughout the galaxy, the human fleet continued its protective duties. The massive battleships moved silently through space, their presence ensuring that no developing species would face the hostility and rejection that humanity had endured. Young civilizations now received immediate diplomatic contact, trade opportunities, and protection during their vulnerable early years in space. The economic changes were equally dramatic. Trade routes that had been controlled by established powers for millennia were now open to newcomers. Technologies that had been hoarded by advanced species were shared freely. The galaxy's scientific advancement had accelerated at an unprecedented rate as diverse minds worked together on common challenges. We could have conquered you with ease, Morrison stated, her words carrying across the chamber and being broadcast throughout civilized space. We could have simply claimed our place through force and demanded tribute from weaker species. Instead, we chose to elevate the galaxy itself. She paused, looking directly at representatives who had once voted to exclude humanity from galactic affairs. Every species deserves the chance we were denied. Every civilization has something valuable to contribute. Our role is not to rule, but to ensure that potential is never wasted again. The session ended with the approval of funding for 12 new exploration missions, each one designed to make contact with species on the verge of achieving interstellar travel. Human ships would escort the diplomatic missions, providing protection and ensuring that first contact followed the new protocols of respect and inclusion. As delegates filed out of the chamber, the sight of human battleships through the viewing ports no longer inspired fear. Instead, they represented hope, guardians of a more just and inclusive cosmic civilization where every voice could be heard.